I always imagined my wedding would be the happiest day of my life, and in many ways it was. But happiness has a way of drawing its own shadow when the people you love insist on standing with their backs to the light. The dress fit like a dream, and I remember the seamstress telling me that satin only looks effortless when someone has bled for it, and somehow that felt true for everything that day. The garden was washed in late afternoon gold, the kind of color that makes old hurts look small and the future look clean, and Ryan's eyes held that soft, trembling joy I had waited for my whole life. For a few blessed minutes, I forgot the emails and the blocked numbers and the heavy silence that fell over dinners when my mother said the word family like a verdict. I forgot Emily's posts that were not letters but knives that smiled, and I let music and sunlight wrap me in a promise. Then the photographer lined us up and told us to lean in and pretend we were one body breathing the same air, and Aunt Linda said she would not stand next to me, and the word traitor left her mouth like something she had been practicing for months, and the camera lost its nerve before I did. I kept the smile on my face because smiles run in our family like an heirloom we cannot sell, but inside a spine I did not know I had pushed through. I knew in that instant that my wedding was not the first time a boundary had been tested, only the first time I refused to move it. People always ask when it started, and I want to say it began with a dress or a ring or a guest list, but the truth is that beginnings hide in small rooms you never clean because no one visits there. Emily and I were born 6 months apart, and our mothers called us the twins they never had, and I learned early that the word twinned can mean braided or it can mean bound. We wore matching dresses with bows that sat like perfect answers on our spines. We shared birthday tables with cakes iced to look like moons, and in every picture a hand I did not choose sat on my shoulder. Adults laughed when she blew out my candles and told me I would blow out bigger candles later, and I tried to believe them while smoke stitched the air around a wish that now belonged to 2 people. Our mothers said the copying meant admiration, and my father said it meant we were lucky to have each other, and I said nothing because children in our family learn the art of swallowing as carefully as other families learn piano. Competition arrived like weather that pretends to be a passing cloud, but it rained for years. In 2nd grade, I drew a sunflower that won a ribbon, and Emily cried that night until my mother cut the ribbon in 2 and pinned half to her sweater, and that was the first time I saw how fairness can be forged into a weapon that cuts only one way. In 4th grade, I learned a dance for a school assembly, and Emily performed it for her class first because her teacher asked for volunteers, and because in our family volunteering means arriving where you are not invited and calling it love. At my 8th birthday party, Emily blew out my candles, and the room turned into a chorus of "Isn't that adorable?" and the photograph from that day is the first picture where my smile looks like a held breath. Later, my mother told me that the kind ones carry more, and I did not know yet that carrying can become a habit so strong you start collecting weight you were never meant to hold. Middle school taught me that imitation is a kind of map for thieves. Emily wanted my friends, but she did not want the years it took to grow them, and so she borrowed secrets and returned them with fingerprints. She followed us from room to room. She sat down when we stood up. She laughed right after I did, as if my mouth were a signal light, and slowly my best friend Sarah began inviting Emily when she invited me, and then inviting Emily when she did not. When I tried to explain, adults told me teenage girls can be cruel and that family cushions the fall, but it is hard to land softly when the cushion is the thing pushing you. By the end of 7th grade, my phone vibrated with messages that included me only as a courtesy, and the 3 of us were suddenly a pair that kept miscounting. I learned not to make plans that would ache when they were changed, and that is how you start to live small without noticing it, by building a life with rooms you can exit quickly. High school offered a door, and his name was Ryan. He was quiet in the honest way, not the kind that hides a storm, and he noticed things about me no one else did. He pointed at the corner of my notebook and said he liked the tiny stars I drew there, and it felt like he had found a country I did not remember naming. When he asked me out, I said yes, with the relief of someone finding a window in a house with sealed panes. Our first dates were simple in a way that felt expensive: ice cream eaten too fast, walks by the river where our reflections braided and unbraided with each step, Little notes that made Monday feel like a story with a good editor. I did not tell Emily because I wanted one thing that belonged to me without needing a lock, but secrets in families like mine are magnets for storms. She found her way anyway, and curiosity arrived dressed as a joke when she asked if he liked me or her, and I laughed because laughter is what you wear when you are told to be nice. At the barbecue, Emily sat beside Ryan and leaned into his space like space was an inheritance she could claim, and she said Anna is lucky and if I had met you first, and Ryan smiled with the politeness that men are taught can fix a woman's discomfort. And I swallowed the heat that rose like a second pulse in my throat. Emily began showing up at the places we went, and the word accidental covered everything like plastic on a couch. She followed him on social media and sent hearts that looked harmless because hearts always look harmless in pink, but the harm lived in the way she refused to see where his attention rested, which was on me. In one photo at a cousin's birthday, she sat on his lap for the joke of it, and someone snapped the picture right before I stood up. And my aunt said, "Oh, lighten up," and my mother said, "She is young," and I learned then that young is a passport people flash when they want to cross without paying. The message she sent him later was not a joke, and the wink at the end made sure I understood that this was not ignorance, but a dare. Ryan told her to stop and he showed me, and I believed him because trust is not a gift I give lightly, but the damage was not the message, it was the room it opened. When I confronted Emily, she smiled with the carelessness of someone who has never had to clean what she spills. She called me dramatic and said I should be flattered and said that if she really wanted him, she could have him, and in that sentence I heard not a threat but a thesis. That line lodged somewhere between my ribs, and it did not hurt every day, but it shaped the way I breathed. Years later, when Ryan proposed in the park where we met, and my yes felt like an entire city lighting up at once, I let myself believe the old aches would respect the ceremony of joy, but grief does not recognize doors and resentment knows all the back roads. When we told my family about the engagement, my mother asked when we would tell Emily, as if Emily were a calendar we could not ignore, and I said we were not inviting her, and silence hit the room with the weight of truth. My mother told me Emily was like a sister, and I said like is the most important word in that sentence, and she told me Emily was young, and I said 25 is not a mistake, it is a choice revealed in patterns. And she told me people would talk, and I thought they already are. The text started as reminders that family means we are obligated to accept harm if it is delivered with a familiar last name. Aunt Linda declared that if Emily was not welcome, neither was she, which felt less like solidarity and more like a bargain that had always been waiting for an excuse to collect. Anonymous numbers told me karma was real, as if karma were a dog I had mistreated that would return to bite only me, and I muted them. But a muted insult still vibrates in your pocket like a heartbeat you did not agree to share. Planning the wedding became less about choosing flowers and more about refusing fires. I sat with Ryan on the couch and watched our spreadsheet swell and shrink while guilt tried to sneak in between the rows. He told me to hold the line, and I believed him, but there is a specific fatigue that comes with defending. Against your own blood, a grind that sandpapers your patience until even choosing napkins feels like a referendum on worth. The social media posts arrived with captions that said bonds cannot be broken and that weddings were gifts best left to fate, and friends messaged me softly asking if I was okay. And I told them yes, because it is hard to explain a lifetime in a bubble of text without sounding like a melodramatic weather report. The night before our tasting, my mother texted that she could not sleep and that Emily was heartbroken and that my choices were carving lines into this family's face. And I put my phone face down and studied the grain of the table because wood does not flinch when asked to carry more. On the morning of the ceremony, I woke early and listened to the hotel's hush, the kind of quiet that makes even the air feel well-behaved. My maid of honor brought coffee and asked if I was ready to marry the love of my life, and I said yes and meant it. And then my phone buzzed with my mother's reminder not to ruin this, and my aunt's suggestion that I mention Emily in my speech, because the least you can do has a way of growing until it becomes the only thing you can do. I set the phone down and chose Lipstick the Color of Courage, and for 20 unbroken minutes under a blue sky, I believed love could be louder than the hum of disapproval. The vow steadied me. The kiss untied a knot I had carried since the first candle Emily blew out for me, and then we lined up for photographs, and the family that had trained me to smile on command finally asked me to smile for their humiliation. When Aunt Linda called me a traitor, I did not argue, because there is a moment when argument is a net thrown after a ship you were never on. And I told the photographer to take the picture because sometimes the only power you have is to document your refusal to flinch. At the reception, the whispers did not bother to disguise themselves. Guests asked if Emily was crying at home, as if tears were proof of innocence, and I danced because dancing is proof of life, and I cut the cake because sweetness is not a negotiation. And then Sarah put my phone in my hand, and a photo of my own reception looked back at me with a caption that declared the room looked empty without her. I walked to my mother and told her I hoped she was proud, because pride is the currency that buys the power to harm in our family. And then I asked Ryan to leave with me, and he did, and the sound in the car on the way out of the city felt like a hymn nobody taught me. Silence followed us home, not as punishment, but as air finally cleared of a perfume that was never mine. In the first weeks, I kept expecting a knock at the door or a note under the mat or a cousin's careful voice rehearsing a speech about forgiveness that meant surrender, but noon after noon passed like soft trains and our house learned us. Ryan made coffee the way I like it without asking, and I learned to laugh again without checking the room first, and I realized that quiet is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of inspection. I slept through the night for the first time in months and woke with my jaw unclenched, and I understood what my therapist would later call the difference between reacting and relating. Then the friend request arrived with my grandmother in the profile picture and the caption that declared family is forever, and for a minute my thumb hovered over accept, because curiosity is the neighbor of hope and both have spare keys to the same door. I remembered the barbecues and the lap and the DM and the cake I left uneaten, and I closed the tab because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all. My mother left a voicemail from an unknown number saying Emily's engagement party was next month and maybe seeing her happy would remind me what family means, and I deleted it because happiness is not a lesson you learn from watching someone else's performance. It is a practice you build in rooms they cannot enter. When I looked at my wedding photos a year later, I kept my eyes on the spaces instead of the faces. There were gaps where people should have stood, and there were chairs where obligations used to sit, but my smile was a sentence without a comma, and Ryan's hands were steady on my waist. And I could tell from my own eyes that I had finally stopped living with my back against a door. People told me you only get one mother, and I told them you only get oneself, and losing her costs more than any reunion can repay. And they told me blood is thicker than water, and I told them so is oil, and you do not drink it to survive. I did not regret choosing myself, not for a second, not even on hot, quiet afternoons when missing felt like a bird that knocks politely on the window, because missing is not a mandate, it is a map that warns where the cliff is. But stories do not end with hashtags or photo captions or exits made in dress shoes. Stories end when you stop explaining them to people who profit from your confusion. So I did something my family never taught me to do. I began to write my own rules, and I posted them not online, but on the inside of my ribs where I could see them in the mirror. I told myself that boundaries are not fences around other people, they are doors you lock from the inside, and that love without respect is a myth that survives on the backs of women taught to apologize for shapeshifting into their own names. I told myself that forgiveness is not a reunion, it is a decision to heal without allowing the person who injured you to set the terms, and that peace cannot be negotiated with someone who benefits from your unrest. The first Thanksgiving came, and I did not go. I cooked chicken instead of turkey because tradition can be a leash and hunger does not care which bird answers its name. Ryan and I set 2 plates and 3 intentions: to laugh at least once, to leave the phones off the table, to tell each other one new story we had never told before, and the house felt like a friend we were getting to know. My phone buzzed in the other room, and I let it sing, and when we washed dishes afterward, he flicked a drop of water at my nose and called it champagne, and I realized I was learning again the difference between performative closeness and intimacy. A week later, my grandmother called from a number I did recognize and said she missed me and that the house was quieter without my laugh and that I was always the good one, and I almost cried because approval still lives in my bones like an old perfume. And then she said Emily's fiancé had a boat, and Aunt Linda said I would love it, and my mother said we are stronger together, and something in me straightened. I told my grandmother that I loved her, and that love is not a coupon I can redeem for safety, and that I would see her if she would see me without negotiations, and she was quiet, and then she cried softly and said she would try. And even trying felt like a new weather front. I started therapy the month after. Not to unlove my family, but to learn how to love myself without their permissions. My therapist asked me to name the first time I felt erased, and I told her about the birthday candles, and she asked me to describe the room, and I remembered the wallpaper, and the way the frosting stained everyone's lips pink, and the sound of the lighter clicking, and the way my mother's hand guided Emily's wrist down, and I cried, because it is strange how memory hoards the exact details that prove you mattered while erasing the ones that taught you otherwise. We worked on a script I could use when the phone rang with the familiar cadence of guilt, and the words were simple: I love you, and I am not available for this conversation, and I will hang up now and try again later. And practicing them out loud felt at first like learning to eat with my left hand, but after a week my tongue stopped tripping. One Saturday in early spring, Emily sent me a message without a request attached, only a photo of a dinner place card with her name written in cursive and the word bride glowing beside it. She said she hoped I was well and that she was engaged and that she wanted peace, and for a moment I saw her as a child wearing my backpack, and then I remembered that compassion does not require amnesia. I wrote back a sentence that took me a decade to learn. I wish you well, and I will not be attending, and I hope your life is full of the kind of joy that does not need an audience to exist. And I put the phone down and went for a walk, because sometimes growth is best measured in the quiet feet of your own company. I know this sounds like a happy ending wearing sensible shoes, and maybe it is, but endings are not the point. The point is the pattern you break so the next person in line does not have to. If I have children, I will teach them that apologies are not currencies to buy entry into unsafe rooms, and that choosing yourself is not selfish, it is stewardship. I will teach them that family can be chosen in both directions, outward toward friends who treat you like a person, and inward toward the parts of you that still sit in old kitchens hoping someone will save you a slice of your own cake. I will tell them the story of a bride who left her reception early not because love failed, but because love kept its promise to protect the life it had just sworn to share, and I will end that story not with a warning, but with a blessing. May you never need to leave a room to keep your dignity, but if you do, may the person who walks out with you be the same one who holds your hand when the door closes.